morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you for the Alliance for Education Impacts Exec Chat today. I'm Jennifer Ferrari, one of the proud founders. And today we are delighted to have Dr. Susan Lusi, who's the president and CEO of Mass Insight Education and Research Incorporated. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Joe Shear, my colleague, so he can do a proper introduction and we'll go ahead and get started right away. It's so great to see everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Jen, thank you very much. And again, welcome everyone. I'm happy to, very pleased to introduce Susan Lusi. Sue was I got to know Sue fairly well when she was superintendent in Providence, Rhode Island. She was a member of the District Management Council. Sue has had a wonderful career as a leader in improving school performance. She led a team of people in Providence that transformed the Providence school system, improved graduation rates, helped a lot of children grow and develop their opportunities for their future. She was part of the Annenberg Project at Brown University. She was Associate Commissioner of the Rhode Island Department of Education. And she leads Mass Insights. As Jennifer indicated, Mass Insights is a 20-year-old plus organization that is focused on improving participation, performance, and success for kids across this country. She's joined by Samantha Kennedy. Samantha is a former teacher and a graduate of Emerson, which is a wonderful teacher preparation institution. And so we welcome both of you. Sue, by the way, is a graduate of Harvard. Her doctorate's from Harvard. And it's my pleasure to welcome both of you this morning. So I turn it over to you, Sue.
Thanks so much, Joe. And I'm so pleased to be here talking with those of you in the Alliance. I think the work you're engaged in is extremely important. And I am all for elevating the voices of superintendents in policy and otherwise. I think it's desperately needed. So Samantha, if you would share the screen. As we're talking, if those of you joining us would just take a minute and in the chat, tell me who you are, where you work, and what your position is, that would be great. So once upon a time, there was a real school district with a diverse population that moved the needle on improving student outcomes over time and despite multiple competing demands. And I'm going to tell you that story. I'm going to share a framework that springs from the work of that district, as well as the work of many other districts and the work of Mass Insight. I'm going to give you an opportunity to apply that framework with your colleagues to your current district context. And I'm going to close by sharing the story of one additional district. Before I tell you the story, though, just briefly, Joe nicely summarized my career. Thank you very much, Joe. And what I take from my career, as well as the 5 years I've spent at Mass Insight, is that in the best of times, many able system leaders, unfortunately, do not always succeed in working to impact or moving the needle in the ways they want to. And there are countless forces that can throw us off course. There are the day-to-day emergencies, there are the political winds, there are the intricacies of state funding and policy, et cetera. This year, unlike any other time in our lives, as we emerge from a global pandemic, those winds or those forces are stronger than ever. And you all are dealing with reentry, both academically and socially and emotionally, really reentry for both adults and kids, enormous community uncertainty, the need for human connection through all of this, and the need to build, rebuild, and continue building trust. So the challenges before system leaders are even more acute now than ever before. And to me, the question is, how do we remain responsive while also staying the course? Or if we change course, how do we make sure it's in ways that will better meet student needs? So if you think about a sailboat, how do we make sure we're tacking to more efficiently reach our ultimate destination, as opposed to being blown completely off course? So next slide, Samantha. Thanks. So I'm going to tell you the story of Evansville-Vanderburgh School Corporation. Evansville is the third largest district in the state of Indiana. The demographics are here on the slide. And I'm going to tease out the story of our work with that district now. So we started looking at the presenting conditions. So the work in Evansville began with a diagnostic to understand their strengths and their opportunities. District staff was already well trained in continuous improvement methods such as Six Sigma. And the district administrative team had a very open approach to looking at data, celebrating success, and also looking objectively and even critically at their reality. And so Mass Insight was engaged to conduct this diagnostic with the district. Lots of students a pattern emerged. Lots of students in Evansville were having success, and the district wanted to improve outcomes for those that did not. We collected artifacts and data like budgets and curriculum and teacher contracts, artifacts on student performance, student referrals, teacher performance data. And the pattern that emerged was in some of the elementary and middle schools, there was a subset of those schools, largely serving the lower income sections of the city, that had students enjoying less success. And several of those schools were also identified on state and federal lists. And so armed with this understanding, both of what was going well and what wasn't, informed by quantitative as well as qualitative data, the district set out to identify clear priorities and a theory of action for addressing them. Next slide. So the district worked really hard to get the conditions right. In Evansville, clustering 5 schools into a zone and changing their conditions, the way time, people, money, and program were handled seemed to be promising. The theory of action came from a review of the full set of circumstances. It built on the strengths and addressed the gaps, and it was particular to the context and drew on national research. And the theory of action in Evansville went something like this. If we provide schools with expert principal coaching from a zone executive director, a nimble team of transformation specialists that can translate the literature to school teams and manage the dollars and partnerships so that principals and leadership teams aren't pulled in multiple directions, and provide additional paid time to train teachers on pedagogical and social emotional methods to connect with their student population, and provide time, space, and facilitation to regularly review their leading and lagging indicators and adjust school level plans, and provide the schools in this zone the permission to opt out of initiatives that aren't directly related to their school level plans with the sign off from the zone director, then school performance and student outcomes will improve. Next slide. They developed an actionable plan, and because stakeholders had been involved in the diagnostic and planning processes, there was widespread buy-in. Buy-in was also created by virtue of resourcing the plan. Sometimes in districts, seeing is believing. And in my experience, if you're not resourcing it, people don't believe that it's really going to happen, and rightfully so. The district leadership knew that the theory of action would take resources. They moved experienced educators with a track record of results into the executive director and specialist roles. And the district brought Mass Insight in to work with and support these folks. And the district addressed contracting and managed stakeholder relationships to ensure teachers in the zone schools could be paid for additional professional development time and invested dollars in partnerships and teacher supports. Next slide. There was ongoing progress monitoring. The zone executive director met bi-weekly with each principal and school leadership team to review plans, look at implementation, improvement and impact data. She met bi-weekly with the superintendent and had a seat on his cabinet and was a direct report to the superintendent. And the year after our partnership began, proficiency rates increased significantly. Next slide. And so the cycle of improvement in Evansville became iterative, looking at conditions, developing a theory of action, setting into motion a plan that was actionable and widely believed in. And in fact, learnings from the zone became strengths to spread district-wide. For example, all schools in Evansville are now clustered by like needs with an expert coach, mentor, or supervisor in place for each set of schools. The clusters are of different sizes, meaning different numbers of schools, based on the understanding that some schools need more intensive support than others. We have supported them to implement school improvement plans, such as the ones that were successful in the zone model. There's been professional development and specifically teacher coaching, which had proved more effective than seminars, and that was scaled district-wide so that all teachers would be equipped with pedagogical and social emotional methods necessary to reach all students. Again, Evansville changed some of the conditions so that there would be capacity to do this work. Namely, they cleared department chair schedules so that they would teach half the day and coach the other half of the day. And they implemented a similar teaching coaching model for elementary and middle schools as well as high schools. Mass Insight and the Evansville team, we were privileged to present with the Evansville team at last year's Carnegie Summit for teaching on that model. Which leverages clusters of schools learning from each other through an instructional rounds method. And there's been sustained focus over time, consistently taking stock of presenting conditions, developing a theory of action based on what needs to improve as well as what is working, and then resourcing the plan effectively. And that has led to sustained improvement. Next slide. So what is our evidence or some of our evidence of sustained improvement? So this partnership has been associated with statistically significant changes in standardized test scores. So as you look at this chart, you see the arrow in the middle, and that's when the partnership between Evansville and Mass Insight began. And in the year after the partnership began, proficiency rates increased significantly by approximately 0.6 of a standard deviation if you're a statistician. And between the spring of 2014 and the spring of 2019, scores improved at a significantly faster rate than they did between the spring of 2009 and 2013. And descriptively, we also see the district making improvements, dramatic improvements in its lowest performing schools. So when you look at the earlier bars, so these dots in each bar are the test score results from each school, ranged by standard deviation. And you see a much larger spread of those results in the earlier years. And as the years go on, you see a clustering upward. Sorry, talking with my hands on Zoom doesn't work very well. But you see a clustering upward of those results. Next slide. You also, the superintendent, Dr. David Smith, has tracked Evansville vis-a-vis 9 other similar districts in Indiana. And these are real districts, and Dr. Smith is adamant that when we use this slide of his, we need to remove the names of the other districts. So I have done so. But what you see is starting in 2010, the district was at number 6 out of the 10, and then steadily progressed upward to 2017 when it was number 2. And so I want to say, on behalf of Mass Insight, it's a privilege to work with Dr. Smith and his team. I think I in no way am trying to attribute all that's happened in Evansville to the work of Mass Insight. That said, having worked with Mass Insight as a superintendent myself, I think external partners can be instrumental in helping orchestrate and provide some of the capacity and focus needed for these changes. So now let's move to the next slide. Thank you. And unpack this framework. So what do we at Mass Insight make of the Evansville story, as well as the work of other schools and districts we've seen over time? So success is characterized by coherence and intentionality. And the next few slides, I'm going to walk you through what I'm referring to as a coherence framework, and also try and say, given that we're emerging from a pandemic, what does this add to the framework? One example of that you'll see throughout a number of these slides is, I think, elevating community, family, and student voice is more important now than ever before, and seeing the perspective from those who are served by the system, as well as those who are not currently well served. Next slide. So you see the diagnostic of strengths and challenges. So priorities for change are chosen on a clear understanding of the presenting conditions. And as I said moments ago, community engagement, I think, is now more important than ever before, given all that we've been through. Next slide. There's a clear theory of action about how the work is going to take place, what needs to happen to make the work possible, make the change possible. Next slide. There's a clear focus on creating enabling conditions. So in the Evansville example, that was the zone with additional autonomies, with the attention to talent, and with the differentiated levels of support. Next slide. The priorities in the plans, the plans to address them are clearly based in the root causes of poor performance and clearly center on equity and build as well on existing strengths in the system. So the plan is actionable and not everything in the kitchen sink. Every district and every school virtually in the nation have a plan. And often in our experience, there's way too much in the plan and way too little attention to execute. And the plan is understood and embraced by those who need to enact it with clear goals. Next. There's identified capacity. So the plan is resourced, including dedicated capacity. There's someone or multiple people who are knowledgeable and empowered to act. Hope and exhortation are not strategies, as everyone on this Zoom knows, and dedicated capacity is required to keep the work moving forward. Next slide. Performance management and reporting. There's a need to revisit and reset on the plan on a regular basis, to build forward based on the progress and to make intelligent adjustments when needed. And again, regular cycles of reporting back and seeking input from stakeholders are, they've always been important and are even more important now. So some common pitfalls, some of which, maybe all of which I've experienced in my career. So sometimes there is coherence, but there's coherence within strands of a strategy and not across strands of a strategy. So the chief academic officer and her department are rolling out a curriculum, but enacting that curriculum requires additional IT and supports and network access. And the IT department doesn't have a plan that matches up with that need. So silos is a common pitfall. Another common pitfall is undifferentiated approaches. So one size fits all approaches to improving teaching and learning that don't account for differences in talent and or conditions across schools. And so that the universal professional development, for example, doesn't map on to the actual needs of the school sites. A third common pitfall is under-resourcing. When I was in Providence, the state teacher evaluation system was developed as if principals had nothing else to do during the day other than evaluate and provide feedback on teachers. Because it was under-resourced, it was a difficult model to really see positive results with. So under-resourcing goes with the part about no magical thinking. And then just to summarize, all of the pieces need to fit together. That sounds obvious, but often is not the case. So to me, intentionality is the blocking and tackling around what you want to do and how you're going to do how you're going to get it done. And that's what's required. It's decidedly unsexy, but most definitely needed. And of course, superintendents don't need to personally do all of this, but leaders do need to make sure that the pieces are in place and that other leaders are empowered to do what's needed. I think we should try breaking into groups here. Take the first few minutes to individually respond to the following. Rate the status of your district on each part of the framework, and I'll put a handout with the framework slides in the chat as well. Rate it on a scale of 1 to 4. So 4, everything's great, and 1, not so much. Then think about what you're most proud of, and then answer the question, where do you most need to act between now and the start of the next school year? What's one of the highest leverage moves you can make to enhance equity for students? Where will you start? And share that with your group. Okay, Samantha, let's not share the screen for a minute while we debrief a little bit. Apologies to anyone who got interrupted, and probably someone did in every room. Let's take a minute and just, were there any ahas or epiphanies in any of your conversations that someone would like to share?
We've dealt with at the CSIU and PA just a great deal of turnover in staff, and then I was with 2 superintendents and assistant superintendents who are kind of new to their districts this year. So trying to how you try and have coherence. I was thinking about the Evansburg district you said, and how long was that superintendent in that place in order to make those changes happen, and how that impacts what it is we're trying to do.
You're absolutely right. And David Smith's been there a long time, which is a blessing. And I've been thinking about, because that is not typical in many cases. So how do we think about building multiple champions for the work in ways that can cross the arc of turnover? And so that's something we're giving a lot of thought to right now, because I don't see building a model that necessitates a given superintendent staying there for 15 years is probably not, unfortunately, not, doesn't have a lot of real world applicability. So,
And Susan, I'd note that I think that I've seen it already this school year. And I think as we move into the end of this school year, we're going to see a massive turnover in district leaders across the country. People
Yeah.
who would have gone last year but stayed because they felt they owed it to their district during the pandemic. And then people who stayed and are just wiped out and are done and are either checking out now or getting ready to check out.
And Stephen, so I think that makes sense to me, unfortunately. And I'm hearing the same about teachers. I don't know what you're all seeing in your districts, but I think the turnover at all levels will be significant. Tony.
Hi, I think that one of the things we talk about here in our administrative team is that every initiative has to survive the superintendent. You can't leave and then you just throw the keys, right? And the whole thing burns down, you know, and that requires a certain amount of humbleness that you're part of you're just a piece of something that's going to go on for a long time. And, you know, I mean, I'm a few years out of retirement and I think about that. Like, what can I start that's going to survive? We don't want to start things that can't survive because it demoralizes people. So, you know, we've had turnover here in Nassau County. I do see a lot of superintendents who are handing it over to someone who's already in the organization, and that does help. But that's a real issue for schools, you know, because you get somebody else who's in there with different ideas and different, you know, different things that they think are important. But equity, that needs to be something everybody thinks is important. I mean,
that's right. And the more you can build agreement on what equity really means, because everybody says the word, but when you start unpacking what it means, not everybody agrees. So that's great. Is there one more thing anyone would like to share? If not, we'll keep moving. All right, Samantha, if you would reshare your screen, that would be great. So when I think about my own work, and I'm thinking about Providence in particular, and a place where it feels like we got it right, or we were at least on the track to getting it right. There were a lot of similarities to this framework. So we had a strategic direction. We had action plans for each member of my cabinet. And in a high need, relatively low resource system like Providence, that wasn't always obvious. But I hired someone who in that district was called a chief of administration. He was superb at execution. And I made him responsible for the regular performance monitoring with my team. And so that combination of having the plan, the capacity, and also the performance management really worked for us. So I'm going to close with one more story. I'm going to make it very brief, and I will share the slides so you can look at the information further. But this is another partnership we had with Aurora Public Schools in Colorado, and the demographics are here. And next slide, Samantha. In brief, we worked with the district in alignment with their strategic plan to launch something called an action zone. And each school in the zone had its own specific plan. There were thematic links, and we used a stakeholder-driven process. Next slide. We, in this instance, establishing conditions was done supporting the district in applying for innovation status with the state of Colorado for this zone of schools. The zone was created around what was the lowest performing high school in Colorado at the time, Aurora Central High School. And so the process started with a needs assessment, started with a lot of community involvement. The zones were set up based on the strengths and the needs of the school. The conditions were, as I said, established through a state process. The zone had its own dedicated support and capacity and sets of autonomies. And there was ongoing, ongoing performance management. And just to share briefly some of the data in closing, Aurora Central High School itself improved on multiple measures, including growth on PSAT and SATs, increases in course pass rates, percentage of college credits earned, graduation rates, and also staff culture. And next slide, Samantha. And you can see there were 2 high schools in the zone, Aurora Central and one other. And you can see on this slide the trajectory of change in graduation rates as a result of the effort. And so in closing, I feel very privileged to have talked with all of you today. If you would like to talk with me or anyone at Mass Insight further, please reach out. And please keep up the work of the Alliance. As I said, I think elevating the voices of district leaders is enormously important and valuable work. It always has been, and particularly now is crucial. So thank you very much.
Susan, thank you very much. Samantha, thank you as well. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Real quick, just as a shameless plug, thank you again, Susan and team, for joining us. It's been terrific. You know, Steve posted here on the comments that they're potentially going to lose 25% of their teaching stock. And Susan, you touched on this at the end. We touched on it in our conversation too, the importance of voice and choice and actual decision-making and empowerment from within, pipeline building, and helping to build that strong community ethos so that people want to stay in the role. And this change cycle, you know, it takes so long to actually move the work, and we're always flipping. So that brings us to just a little plug for our next speaker, which is coming up. We're trying to do this the first Tuesday of every month. So we actually have a really great presenter with Kelly Young. She's going to be joining us from Education Reimagined. And this is really about personalized learning. And again, assigning voice and choice to kids and to these learners in the community so that there's an automatic buy-in and that there's progress towards larger targets. And just want to close on a happy note to say, happy spring, everybody. It's so great to see all of you. I hope you'll be joining us in Chicago. And with no further ado, have a wonderful rest of the week.